Little Nicky, a fairy tale of the darkest, blackety-black, horrid nightmares man has known or will ever know. Once, long ago, in the little hamlet of Maurice, situated in the magical land of Illinois, there was born to a woman in a teaspoon, via methods of conception totally unsuitable to be mentioned in a YouTube video, a boy called Nicky. After holding him to her breast and looking into his dead little piggy eyes for the first time, she screamed and threw him into her mother's basement, before eloping with the kettle, much to the amusement of the pot, who had long suspected the kettle to be an uncouth, lecherous piece of kitchenware, given to whistling suggestively at any young woman wandering by, though it always claimed to be just be boiling at that particular time. Wizened by age though she was, Nicky's granny did her best to raise him to be a decent man, though her efforts were in vain, for there was evil in Nicky. It was not the thrilling evil of the true villain with his dark schemes and black heart, nor was it the terrifying evil of a monster lurking beneath the bridge or in the shadowy depths of old forests, dreaming only of rending the flesh and crunching the bones of weary travellers. No, his evil was the grubby, twisted evil of a cowardly bully, of a man who blames everyone but himself and lashes out only at those he believes to be weak. There is not much to be told of those years, though perhaps the most telling fact is that the rats and cockroaches moved out of the basement, unwilling to live in close proximity to Nicky. But then, one day, after Nicky had grown as much as he was ever likely to, he came to Granny and said, "Granny, I'm guessing the day has come for me to find my fortune, and none of those faceless cowards will stop me. But I need food and money." Now Granny was far from wealthy. She had never even been able to afford to replace the kettle after all, but Nicky was her flesh and blood, and so she gave him a third of all that she had, which he took gleefully, while muttering under his breath that she should have given him more in honour of how he had cared for her all these years, and set out to find his fortune. Now young Nicky had a plan. Always playful around sailors and performing sexual favours in return for their stories, he determined to join the navy and serve his king, W the Imbecilic. So he set out on his journey with nothing but his wits and a third of all that Granny owned. Within a day, however, he had lost that third to a rat called Larry, who tricked him into chasing after a crow while Larry stole his possessions and whittled in his sleeping blanket. Still, he managed to make his way to the great lake of Michigan, where the navy trained and signed up. Sadly, however, it turned out that he got seasick in a puddle, and despite his incredible oral talents, the other recruits found the way he cried for Granny each night irritating, and so Nicky was sent home. Granny was pleased to see him home, despite the foul miasma that followed him everywhere, and preferred to be called George, insisting that it was a sentient being in its own right, and not just a byproduct of Nicky's phobia regarding soap. Though her joy soon soured once she realised he had not made his fortune, and in fact had only come home to request more money. Still, he was her kin, also perhaps this time he would find his fortune, and repay her generosity tenfold. So Granny gave him the second third of all that she owned, and asked him what his plans were. "Well, Granny," said he, "now I am a naval veteran and a man of honour. I shall find a wife to support me, and bear fine sons to carry on my name." And Granny wept as he set forth, knowing in her heart of hearts that her hunchbacked dwarf of a grandson could never find a wife, and that she would die alone and destitute in her little cottage. Still, Granny was wrong, for after Nicky had given a magpie called Philin all that he had, the magpie told him of the cursed princess of the land of Iowa. This fair maiden had been cursed by a jealous witch that she would know misery and love only the worst of men, and who in all the 50 lands of USA could be worse than Nicky. So Nicky set out for the land of Iowa, offering his oral skills to a passing carter in order to speed up his journey, and upon his arrival managed to beg his way to an audience with the princess, who in accordance with the curse fell in love with the loathsome little troglodyte. Despite the protests of her parents, the king and queen of Iowa, she moved Nicky into her palace and supported him while he flirted with the kitchen maids and told poorly conceived and non-descriptive tall tales of his heroic time in the navy, despite the fact that he had spent less time in the ocean waves than a desert nomad. In the fullness of time, the princess bore Nicky the son he had dreamed of, but due to his unhealthy nature, the son was cursed with illness. Concerned with the way in which he treated their daughter and poor grandson, the king and queen intervened, beseeching a mighty wizard who agreed to break the curse on their daughter. Well, this was probably an act of vengeance against George, who had beaten the wizard at poker and was earning a reputation as an erudite and fascinating raconteur, despite the fact that he was essentially a wandering stench. In the end, it matters little. The spell was broken, and the princess, seeing Nicky for what he truly was, threw him from her carriage, and banished him from the land of Io. So Nicky and George made their way back to Maurice and Granny. Once there, Nicky demanded more money so that he could seek his fortune once again, but Granny put her foot down. "My grandson, you have taken 2/3 of all that I own. Should I give you any more, I will surely starve. Still, though ugly and poorly potty-trained you may be, you are flesh of my flesh. If you wish, you may stay with me, and though it will not be easy, we might still live on what is left." After spending half an hour on the floor rolling around and crying, Nicky finally agreed to his granny's terms. George, however, had at long last had enough of Nicky, and left to pursue a successful career as a radio personality, where the fact that he was an abominable stench that made the elder gods' unwashed underwear seem pleasant was not held against him. In fact, it was George's success that inspired Nicky to his final plan to seek out his fortune, while staying safe and secure in his bondage sleep sack in Granny's basement. George was a talented storyteller, and had come from his stinky pores, so surely Nicky was at least as talented. Nicky would become a writer, and not just any writer. No, he would be the greatest writer of horror that Illinois or Iowa or even USA had ever seen. So Nicky started to scribble incomprehensible stories on scraps of paper, and send them off to the many publishing houses in USA. But all of them just laughed at his terrible stories, and told him that he wasn't as good as Stephen, the King of Horror, or the Keen Writer, or even their pet puppy. With each rejection, Nicky grew angrier and angrier. He even started to write nasty notes he'd slip under the Keen Writer's door when they were away from home and no one was looking. All of which just made the Keen Writer laugh. With each year, Nicky grew more and more despondent as no one took him seriously, even when he started to publish his own stories by handing them out to people who'd stopped their carriages at crossroads. The only things that gave him joy in life were his bondage sleep sack and masturbating to the memories of his youth, when he'd been ever so playful around sailors, who now regarded him and his claims of being an honourable veteran with nothing but scorn. And then, one lonely day, he tied his bondage sleep sack too tight and suffocated himself, his last final croaked word being "Rosebud," which was much to the secret relief of Granny, who burned down the cottage, claimed the insurance money, and emigrated to Fiji. And the moral of this story is that when you engage in autoerotic asphyxiation by yourself, a safe word won't save your ass.